When you think about Iran, maybe the first images that come to your mind are those of bearded ayatollahs and angry mobs screaming death to America. Or, if you followed the news last year, maybe you think of brave young women taking off their veils and the thousands of protesters in the streets. For me, though, Iran always reminds me of the image of a little girl in Jafar Panahi's White Balloon. It was one of the first films I saw by this director, and it is a very sweet and heartwarming story about a girl trying to get back some money her mom gave her to buy a goldfish.
گم شده؟ نه گمش که نکردم اول گم کرده بودم پیداش کردم کو؟ سالیان مثلا توی این محل من کاسبم همه میشناسن و میدونن بیان شیشتا از من پیرن میخرن.
When I first saw this movie, I had the same sort of feelings I have when watching a Studio Ghibli film. I felt fuzzy and nurtured, but also challenged and inspired. It was a completely different movie style I was used to, especially for a live-action film, and I instantly connected to it. I was surprised and amazed, and so very happy I got to enjoy cinema again. That has been my repeat experience with Iranian films. I am rarely ever disappointed. In fact, most films tend to surpass my expectations. Iranian cinema, for me, has a very special power. It is a kind of cinema I would consider to be very artistic, but it always manages to entertain me. In the last few years, Iranian cinema has been a respite, to be honest. Today's cinematic landscape is full of failed Hollywood blockbusters. I find it really difficult to pay to watch an American film nowadays, which is a shame because they have the widest distribution. Unless you go to an independent or art house theater, there are many films you never get to watch in the big screen. But some Iranian filmmakers have managed to get the public's attention in the last decade, and thankfully, that means that Iranian films are more accessible today. In the last 2 years, about 80% of the times I went to the cinema, it was to watch an Iranian film. It is the safest bet to get bang for my buck. Sometimes, in the middle of work and family life, you want something that can captivate you without being exhausting. In this video, I wanted to share some of the reasons why I fell in love with Iranian cinema and why I think it is the antidote to Hollywood's formulaic blockbusters. Remember, though, that this is not an exhaustive critique of Iranian cinema as a whole, because I'm just a fan, not an expert. Still, I hope you can enjoy it, and if you do, don't forget to like and subscribe. We can't speak about the uniqueness of Iranian cinema without mentioning the 1979 Iranian Revolution, in which Iran officially became the Islamic Republic of Iran after the overthrow of the Pahlavi dynasty. The tumultuous years that followed the revolution saw increased censorship, repression, and a terrible war with Iraq. Almost half of the cinemas were burned down, even though Ayatollah Khomeini himself said that he did not disapprove of cinema, only of moral corruption, but welcomed the pure and Islamic cinema in society. Although, whether back then or today, nobody can quite pinpoint what an Islamic cinema is or is supposed to be. Unlike what you might have expected, the Islamic Revolution in Iran did not eliminate cinema. Institutions such as Farabi Cinema Foundation and the Center for Experimental and Semi-Professional Cinema were instrumental to support filmmakers, but other state and religious institutions were also created that produced both propaganda films and films about social issues. One of the institutions that survived the transition from the Shah's authoritarian regime to the current Islamic theocracy was the Center for the Intellectual Development of Children and Young Adults, often referred to as Qanun. Famous director Abbas Kiarostami was actually one of the people who oversaw the center's Department of Cinema during its first several years. Between 1970 and the late 1990s, the center produced many children and auteur films of Iranian directors. Maybe that is one of the reasons why so many Iranian films highlight the experience of children with such sensitivity and respect. Iran did not completely nationalize the film industry either, so new private production companies were also created. All these foundations, institutions, and enterprises generated a healthy competition that continued to encourage higher quality filmmaking. At the same time, we can't forget that cinema was and still is highly regulated in Iran. This is why in Iranian films you cannot see unveiled women, physical contact between men and women, and criticism of Islamic principles. Unlike what you see in much of Iranian films, women do not often use veils in the house, for example. You just can't see them without them in a film. One of the ironies is that, while Iranian cinema has been strictly regulated since the revolution, it has also flourished as an internationally acclaimed art form in Iran. As Agnes de Victor writes, the main goal of the cinematographic policy of the Islamic Republic of Iran was not only artistic or economic. The main goal was the achievement of an ideological project, even if it was not explicitly defined as such. The new regime gradually even gave high political and social functions to cinema. So, we've seen that Iranian cinema has always been ideological at its core, but obviously that doesn't mean that movies produced and distributed in Iran are just propaganda with some outliers who criticize the status quo. Iranians love cinema, both as art but also as entertainment.
We've now come to Pars Cinema in the center of Tehran. Going to the movies is a favorite pastime of Iranians, and the movie industry here is prolific. Tickets cost just about $1, but all you get for now are Iranian films. And it's not all about the revolution or the principles and the values of the Islamic Republic. Quite the contrary, it's mostly about universal themes: love, comedy, drama. And then within what is acceptable in the Islamic Republic, some movies push the envelope.
Iranian cinema, such as that of Ashkar Farhadi or Saeed Rustai, does have a lot to say about Iranian society. Rustai's film, Layla's Brothers, for example, has many subtle critiques of the economic misery of capitalism and also of the failure of patriarchal structures. But it is also an equally funny and dramatic film, with a strong character ensemble. Rustai has said himself that he does not think he has any metaphorical approach. Instead, he focuses on good stories.
بالاخره اینها آدم‌هایی هستند که من خیلی هنری در استعاره و نماد نمی‌بینم. من دوست دارم قصه برام مهمه. دوست دارم قصه‌ام رو بتونم درست تعریف کنم.
Ashkar Farhadi has similarly shared his concerns about making sure his films are interesting.
برای من مهمترین چیز بعد از که فیلم ساختم.
The most important thing for me to understand after I'm done with the film is that if my film is boring or not.
دوست ندارم وسط فیلمم کسی.
I don't like anyone to go out in the
حتی
middle of
اگه
my film.
دستشویی داره.
Even if they have to go and pee.
فیلم من باید کاری کنه که اون مجبور بشه تا آخر بشه.
My film has to do something that they have to sit and finish the film and then leave.
All of Farhadi's films seem to have moral dilemmas at their core, convoluted plots that you can't predict and that don't give you an ending wrapped in a bow. When you are watching a film like A Separation, The Salesman, or A Hero, you feel compelled to go with those characters anywhere the story takes you, because it seems to only get deeper and deeper, with so many twists and turns you just can't stop watching. When Iranian filmmakers are not strictly story-driven, they push the envelope in other ways. Jafar Panahi, for example, has films in which fiction and documentary merge to the point where these categories don't really make sense anymore. But they are still grounded in very real people who embody the story in a more authentic way, with all of their mannerisms, accents, and eccentricities. Because of these approaches, Iranian cinema often manages to tackle difficult topics like sexual assault, exile, or drug abuse in ways that don't feel depressing or exploitative. It manages to be an extremely entertaining movie experience, despite the depth of the characters, stories, and even aesthetics. A healthy mix of entertainment and art is one of the factors why Iranian cinema became so popular. Another is the fascination with creating such masterpieces under censorship and the constant threat of arrest and exile. Film curator Ande Migaro shares her experience attending the Faj International Film Festival from 2002 to 2013. This is a major film festival in Iran and, more interestingly, a place where Iranian filmmakers test the limits of censorship. As Demigaro writes, The propensity of directors everywhere to keep working to the very last minute is pushed to the very limits with Fajr. A byproduct of this is that films screened at Fajr have not always been fully viewed by the full committee of officials. Is this perhaps recognized as a loophole by some filmmakers? The domestic audience flocks to the festival screenings, aware that films may later be cut or refuse a screening permit. Demi Guerrero describes the excitement of the audience and film critics as they watch films that they have no idea whether this will be the final cut or not. Some films that were shown at this festival include Offside, which was after banned in Iran, and A Separation, while Ashghar Farhadi had been taken for questioning over a different issue. It's normal for Iranian directors to submit fake scripts to the authorities, to receive filming permits, and then hope for the film to do well abroad or online. The image of film directors as rebels is also one which has captivated Western audiences. When you are seeing a band filmed, it feels like an act of defiance. The directors become heroes. This has definitely been a factor in the rising popularity of Iranian cinema. Just think of the case of Jafar Panahi, who has been banned from making films since 2010 and was on house arrest and sometimes in prison until this year. Still, he continued to make films and winning awards in Berlin and Cannes. An honest critique of his work can't ignore that much of it was done illegally and at huge personal risk, and that plays into the marketing. Just see this US trailer for his latest film. Sometimes, this leads to some commentators to think that censorship is one of the drivers of creativity and innovation behind Iranian cinema, that only filmmakers pushed to the limit could create such pieces of art. But director Ashghar Farhadi is quick to dismiss that idea. He said, "For someone like me and of my generation, who was born and has grown up with these restrictions, be they at home, at school, on the street, or at university, sometimes this borderline between being restricted and not being restricted is blurred. Not in the same sense that I sometimes hear restrictions lead to creativity. This is wrong to say. Perhaps in the short run, restrictions can bring about creativity, but in the long term, it destroys it. Therefore, if there were no restrictions for Iranian filmmakers, we would have seen more creativity from them." Jafar Panahi also does not romanticize his experience with censorship in any way.
و بعد در نهایت ما رو یا جاسوس امریکا یا جاسوس نمیدونم موساد و فلان و فلان و فلان میکننش. این هزینه این طرفه، هزینه های اینطوریه که باید پرداخت کرد.
One perverse consequence of the censorship is that of the production of festival films, according to Demi Guerrero. She writes that after Jafar Panahi's banned film The Circle won the Golden Lion in Venice, other filmmakers focused on getting an international audience instead of a domestic one. One director was able to heal this rift though, Ashghar Farhadi with his film About Ali. While Jafar Panahi was forced to almost abandon domestic audiences, Farhadi manages to achieve a balance that many young Iranian filmmakers started to want to emulate. I don't think it is a coincidence that Farhadi's films are also often the gateway of foreign audiences to Iranian cinema today. They really do have a mass appeal that can go beyond the highbrow festival movie. Some Iranians feel certain films should not be seen by foreigners because they will not understand all the cultural nuances and will just leave with a bad idea about Iran and its people. However, from my personal experience, Iranian films usually achieve the opposite effect. Whenever I invite a friend to see an Iranian film with me, their reaction usually is one of wonder and astonishment at how, well, normal Iranian society is. There is often some kind of voyeuristic instinct, the fact that you are being brought inside a society which you hardly know anything about, but often by the mid of the film, people are so engrossed in the story that chadors become a small detail and not the main thing. In that way, Iranian cinema actually exposes a lot of Orientalist bias of audiences and challenges that perception. I think overall this is good, but I also understand that it is a problem when it becomes the only thing you remember about an Iranian film. That is why the best Iranian filmmakers tend to integrate social critique in their works without making it too obvious. Iranian and foreign audiences alike do not need sermons about Iran's politics or society. What we need are good stories. But we must also remind ourselves of one crucial thing. What I think about when I refer to Iranian cinema might be radically different from what Iranians think themselves. As most of the films we have access to have been meticulously selected by festival programmers, there is a lot of film production from Iran which we never get to see. And that can really skew our ideas of what Iranian cinema is. I thought it was interesting what Pana Panahi said about the reaction in Iran to his film Hit the Road from the people who managed to see it in a streaming platform. In general, the most negative reviews I've gotten come from Iranians. They find the film too long or the script uninteresting. But I think that's because Iran is extremely conservative. We're isolated and locked into a certain way of being, and also in terms of cinema. Iranian cinema isn't ready for anything a bit whimsical or postmodern. Now, that's an interesting take. Our idea of Iranian cinema has evolved since Kiarostami won the Palme d'Or in Cannes. Today, Iranian films that reach Western audiences are as varied as thrillers and horror movies. Surely, many movies being produced in Iran today will not reach us, and probably for good reason. But just the ones that have in the last 10 years are a testament to a truly astonishing film production from a country which has been basically cancelled by half the world. That is why I think that it is the best antidote to the American blockbuster. If you are sick of formulaic movies that just repeat the same tropes and rehash the same ideas, give the Iranian films mentioned in this video a try. Hey, at the very least, I can guarantee that they are entertaining, although in ways that you are probably not expecting. Thank you for watching, and if you liked this video, don't forget to subscribe.